Welcome to Doctrine and Devotion, a podcast that explores Christian faith and practice from a Reformed Baptist perspective. My name is Joe Thorne. I'm the lead pastor of Redeemer Fellowship in St. Charles, Illinois. And you know what happens a lot of Thursdays. It's hard for Jimmy and I to connect. So what we like to do is we like to bring on cool people that are in ministry, people that are in academia, people that have a good grasp on theology, people that love the local church, all kinds of people, right? But people that we vibe with, people that we think are good for you to know, people that encourage us and help us to become better Christians. And today I'm super pumped to bring on a friend, Pastor Vaughn Sanders. Pastor Vaughn is the preaching pastor, senior pastor, lead pastor. We'll get into it at First Baptist Church. So you know he's legit because it ain't second, it's First Baptist Church in Bolingbrook, Illinois. What's up, Vaughn?
What's happening, brother? Man, thank you so much. Mama, we made it. We're on Doc and Devo. So this is exciting. I've been looking forward to this.
Hi, Mom.
She will watch.
Well, we'll be sure and be professional here. All right, we won't get too crazy.
Okay. She knows me.
Then we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about it. So you're in Bolingbrook, and so Bolingbrook is a suburb of Chicago. Tell people a little bit about Bolingbrook. Like, what is Bolingbrook like?
Yeah, so Bolingbrook is kind of a bedroom community. I don't know if that term is really used much anymore, but folks are really more transient, people that are commuting into the city, into Chicago or other places around, and typically have their home in a place like Bolingbrook. And we see a lot of people that move into town and stay here for a few years, and then they get transferred somewhere else for their role or their job. And so we see a lot of that stuff kind of happening. But what I really love about Bolingbrook is its diversity. Primarily Anglo, but we have a high population of Hispanic, Black, Asian, and others. So when we talk about the mission field and reaching others, I mean, my neighbors are super diverse and have really great conversations. And so that's really the big thing about Bolingbrook. And if you haven't been into Illinois, most people know Bolingbrook for our IKEA. So people come from miles and miles around just to hit up the IKEA here in Bolingbrook.
I do make my way to Bolingbrook for IKEA. That is absolutely true. Got to get them meatballs and get some Billy bookcases, whatever I need. Is that diversity reflected in your church at First Baptist?
Yeah, and that's been something that has been since the founding, 53 years ago. We've always been very diverse. And so when I do talk to other pastors, they say, well, how did you get it to be diverse the way it is? And I mean, this is just something that God has done with us over the years. And I love that because there's still a stigma around mixed marriages or people getting together from different ethnic groups. But the way we've been able to do church together has been really encouraging. Just come from all walks and background, not only ethnicities, but generations, economic status, all those things to come together just to worship the Lord. And so I'm very happy and proud of that.
Yeah, I can imagine, people are going to want what's the recipe, what's the sauce, how did you do it, when it's like, no, this has been a part of our DNA. It's been a part of our culture. And it's such because I mean, obviously there are situations where churches wind up when, neighborhoods change. And what we've oftentimes seen is a church remains all white, the demographics of the city changes, and it becomes much more mixed, if not predominantly, say, Hispanic or African American. But none of those people from the community are going to the church, and the people in the church no longer even live in the area. They've all moved out. And it's like, well, now what do you do? And there are, I think, good solutions to that. But for churches that have embraced this early on, it's just a part of your DNA. Is there something in, like, what is it at First Baptist that allows this to flourish and seem so natural? Is there something there that you could actually put your finger on? Or is it just, we've always been this way?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is what you really just touched on is, people want to be around people that look like them. And we just happen to have a lot of different types of people. And so when people come in and see that, and now I'm happy to say that we are a welcoming community. So when people come in, they feel welcome. That didn't used to be the case when I first started.
Oh.
But when people come in, they say, oh, well, this feels like home. I'm hearing that a lot more. And they're getting to know different types of people that might be out of their typical sphere, or maybe it is in their sphere, and they're just encouraged by how well we are able to get along together, and whatever differences there might be that we hear about on the news or anything like that. It doesn't. I mean, not to say it doesn't exist, but it's not as inflammatory or as crucial or dividing when it comes to our congregation. So, it's a lot of different things. That is the makeup that God has put forward to us. But there's been a lot of work and intentionality behind it too. Like, really, regardless of somebody off the street that is homeless that comes in, or somebody with a 3-piece suit come in and park their Beamer in the parking lot, right? So we want to treat each of them the same, and they're welcome just alike.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We're like at Redeemer, we're in St. Charles, so we're much farther west than you. So we're like the last. St. Charles, it's the last city it's the farthest west city I usually hear mentioned when it comes to traffic. They'll just mention 64 out to St. Charles, not all the time. So we're far west suburbs. And St. Charles is like 94% Anglo. So we're not going to have as much diversity pulling from the people in our community as you might in Bolingbrook. But I still believe you should have as much diversity in your church as is in your community. Like that's what you should have. And so like when we have the generational and socioeconomic diversity and the ethnic diversity that is possible, we actually do have that here. And that feels good. And one of the things, you mentioned welcoming. One of the things that I can testify to that our people have said, or that newcomers have said, is that, wow, you guys made me feel welcome. Like you actually, you sought me. And by the way, when the pastor does that, I don't know what size your church is. Our church is, smaller church, 200 and something people. But I've always, like when I come out, if I see somebody that I don't recognize, I always just make a beeline for them and be like, hey, how you doing? I'm Joe. And that, like most churches, doesn't matter the size, they just don't get that greeting from the preacher. And then our people, that's made a big difference on all kinds of people from different, at least in our area, feeling like, oh, I want to come back. I want to see this place again. Assuming that, they're gonna appreciate the preaching, right? There's something in the preaching of the word that they're going to connect to. They appreciate or enjoy the worship music. But that aspect of welcoming and community is always super important. And I find it to be like one of the more sticky elements in people coming and staying.
Yeah, you actually amplify that for me, because I mean your church is like my church, home away from home. So when I get a break, I like to go let you preach for a Sunday and sit under your teaching, which is awesome. But when I've come to your church or come to the Doc and Devo conferences, that's the one thing that really stood out to me, is how welcoming and inviting your folks have been. And that really impressed upon me, like, hey, we can do a lot better job. If they can do this for a conference and all these people coming in and everybody to feel welcome, then, our small church, we run about, after the pandemic, we're running about 40 to 50 or so. But if they can do it with these large numbers of people, certainly we can do it as well, to make sure people feel seen. They feel appreciated. They're not, alone, because, going to a new church is tough.
Yeah.
And going in, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know how the people are going to be. And you kind of want to sit in the back so you can sneak out if you need to. But, when you have people come in like, hey, come in, I save you a seat, come sit with me and kind of explain how things work, show them the ropes. That means a lot to people when they come in through the door. Yeah.
Just having like people, take notice of them, be invested, and then them having information, like just knowing like, what am I supposed to do is
right.
Because it is, especially as an introvert, like I need that. But I remember as a new Christian or as a non-Christian walking in, man, not knowing anything, having people that know what's going on and can actually speak to me in a way that I can understand, so I know what's next, is definitely calms me down. Let's talk about your time at First Baptist, because you were a deacon there. And you've been the what's your title? You're the preaching pastor. I don't know if you have a specific title or not, but since 2018, I think, right?
Yeah, it's lead teaching pastor.
Okay.
Whatever that means.
Yeah, I know that. I get called lead pastor. It's absolutely meaningless. All it means is I do most of the preaching and I cast most of the vision. I have no more authority than anybody else. Congregation has the authority. They can fire me. Right. Because we Baptist. Anyway. Yeah. So how did you go from being one of the deacons there to being the teaching pastor?
Well, I'll take you even a little back further than that. Really sensing my call to ministry, and I've been in IT for a long time, over 20 years at this point, and it came to a time where a lot of stuff going on. Always been in church since the time I was growing up. And there just came a point where I just felt something shifting. I felt like a sense of the call to ministry. I had a conversation with my wife, and she's like, well, what does that mean? You're going to quit your job and be a pastor? I'm like, I don't know. We'll figure it out. And we prayed that night that I would just be aware and live life with an open hand and take opportunities as they came. Just as God led us to wherever he was going to lead us. Right. And so shortly after that, there became available, I heard about a Koine Greek class. And I'm like, well, that sounds interesting. Maybe that's something I should do. This is something new I never seen before. Maybe I should take part of that. And so, that class just opened my eyes to this whole new world.
Where was that?
I never really... actually, the previous pastor at First Baptist taught that. He went to Trinity and such, and he did the Theology Thursdays, and this was one of the things that he did on the side. And that's when I felt like, okay, I need to go deeper in this, learning the original languages and all that, and really diving into, how scripture is laid out for us and the different nuances here and there. That really opened up a lot of things. And so that was at First Baptist then. And so the church we were at, it felt like we were square pegs and all it had was round holes. It felt really difficult to serve. Okay. And we're like, if we just want to serve the Lord, it shouldn't be that hard, right? We didn't fit in and things just didn't work out right. And so we checked out First Baptist, and the pastor then, he was, preaching through the genealogies. And I mean, I've never been on the edge of my seat before when the pastor is preaching through the genealogies at the beginning. Nice. And so I'm like, okay, maybe this is it. And when we built a friendship there. So under him is really where he really started to encourage me, and he saw some giftings in me that he just started to fan the flames on. He went on mission trips and things of that nature, and he's like, well, maybe you should preach. I'm like, no, I'm not a preacher. And he's like, we'll see about that. Yeah. And I love it. Through those things under him, becoming a deacon and really being able to serve people. And again, him just fanning the flames for me, being able to soak up a lot of things. He would always offer books to read, and always just, took them in as fast as I could possible. And later to be ordained as an elder. And soon the pastor left, and I was on the search committee. And going through each of those, and there was a candidate that we were highlighting, really looking at, and I reached out to him to schedule another meeting. And he said, you know what, I've been, looking at the website, and at the time I was interim and I was preaching every Sunday. And he said, after, really listening to your sermons and how you preach, I could tell you love the people there. And he said, I think you need to consider being lead pastor. Wow. I'm like, wait a minute. No, you're supposed to want the job. I'm not in this. Yeah. But I had been hearing other things from other people, like, why not you? How come you won't put your name in? I'm like, well, I'm the second guy. I'm not the first guy. But the Lord really made it very clear what he was doing. And I said, Lord, if you're in this, then, you'll make it work. I don't know how I'm going to do it with another job and a family and all that kind of stuff. But, if it's meant to be, you'll make it work. And, 5 years later, he has.
That's amazing. And so, as a bivocational pastor, Jimmy is on staff here. He's very focused in where he gives his time, and he functions more at that executive pastor kind of level. Though right now he's really investing in a lot of the youth while we're in the process of doing some hiring. Anyway, he talks about bivocational ministry because there are different levels at which many people will choose to go bivocational. Some people are in it because they don't have a choice, right? I want to do this, and the church is not even capable. Can you tell us what you think the advantages are of bivocational ministry for a preaching pastor?
Yeah, and I think there's some nomenclature out there that talks about co-vocational versus bivocational, and that connotation is the bivocational is more of I have to supplement my income somewhere else because I can't do it over here. But co-vocational, I think, is more intentional around
that's good
how you're serving.
Yeah,
and so it's more of a choice there than more of a have to. I mean, it's probably splitting hairs, but I like the delineation there.
That's good.
And
it's helpful.
With me, my IT role, the leadership roles that I have outside of the church, I like to say it gives me street cred. So it gives me cred in the pulpit for my people because I can explain to them or talk to them through how I'm living out my faith in the corporate world every day, the conversations I'm having. So to show that, like, it is possible. Like you're not going to get fired for being there or people knowing that you're Christian or they come to you and ask for prayer, right?
Yeah.
There's ways that we can authentically live out our faith and not be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so on the flip side, when I'm at, company functions or dinners or whatever have you, people's like, hey, Vaughn, what do you like to do in your spare time? Like, well, I'm a pastor of local church. A lot of folks, they don't know any pastors or, to your point earlier, haven't, been able to talk to a pastor like, whoa, what do you mean? What is that about? Tell me more.
Yeah.
And so now the Lord has laid a table for me to have an evangelistic conversation with folks. Sometimes it just, goes over their heads, and sometimes it brings on more questions and builds a relationship. And I am known as that guy, like, hey, I know you're religious. I got this stuff going on. Can you pray for me? Yeah. Like those have been the sweetest times within my corporate role that I never anticipated coming. And so those are really the huge benefits for me being co-vocational or bivocational.
Yeah. Also, Vaughn, a big part of this, like when you're talking about, like, hey, man, they find out I'm a pastor, because I'll get that too in different contexts, right? Or if they wind up coming to you because they know that you are a religious man. They only do that if you're approachable, normal. Right. If you're, you get there, you have to be somewhat ordinary, right? I mean, we're set apart by our faith and our conduct. Yes. So we're not like the world in that way, but we are still normal people, normal-ish people, different values and visions of what we're called and made to be. But you've got to have that sense of approachability because there are lots of super devout religious people out there that are just so weird and off-putting. It's like, yeah, right. I get it, bro. I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
But for them to actually want to means that you are existing in that workspace vocationally in a healthy way where they want to hear more. They want to talk to you about it. I think I'm just grateful that you have that opportunity because it's easy for me to armchair quarterback, how you're supposed to function in the workplace. Right. Now, it's like I can preach the word and I can preach it unapologetically, but when it comes to like functioning in the world, I'm not appealing to the work that I did in the world when I was a young person. You know what I mean? I have to make my appeal from Scripture, but then I point to people like you and others, and people in our church that are actively doing it. The guys like Jimmy, or just anybody in our church that's following the Lord in the workplace. There are so many good examples to point to, and I feel like if you're not since I'm not that person, you want to highlight people that are actually doing it and not just throw out ideologies for people to sort of grasp at, make it concrete. I think that's really good. But
yeah, there's definitely a lot of that, to be able to point to, direct examples as to what it looks like and how it works. And for me also, just being as a leader, right, leading by example, leading from the front. People just have this idea of what's okay and what's not, or just thinking through various things, and they get stumped, or they use it as a cop out. Like, well, I'm not an evangelist, so I'm absolved from doing any of that stuff. But that's obviously not true.
Yeah, I love that. We all do it. We all give ourselves. We'll come up with excuses to get away with. Yeah. To get away from certain responsibilities that we kind of know are ours. So what makes it difficult? Like, do you ever wish you weren't co-vocational? Is there ever do you ever feel like, oh, this is too much? What are some drawbacks to it?
It's definitely a lot. So no question about it. And I, do everything according to my calendar. Like it's got to be in my calendar in order to ensure that I'm spending time in the right places with the right people, doing the right things. And so a lot of the fluff that I used to have in my life, people talk about scrolling through the TikToks and Facebooks and all that stuff. I mean, not to say that I don't, but I mean, this is very little because I simply just don't have the bandwidth in order to be able to do that. So, in my corporate job, there's a lack of flexibility, which has really been frustrating to me lately. And I'm trying to find ways to get out of that IT job and find other avenues, because I have no control over my calendar, 9 to 5, so to speak.
Right.
And so I would love to have some more flexibility, but at the same time, I do have enough flexibility to do things like this, right? Because I do have command over my calendar that I can find places to do the things that need to be done. And so while, I'm not like a plumber or something like that, where I'm, on the job, with my hands working from 9 to 5, I'm able to find pockets during the day, with the flexibility that I do have, but I would love to have more. To be honest with you, I don't know what I would do with my time if pastoring was my only vocation. Like I've talked to other folks and about how they spend time, and I mean, it sounds amazing. So I would love to have that extra time, but I still feel like, maybe I would always be co-vocational because of the benefits that I outlined earlier. And I find like a lot of pastors, they start to live in a bubble. They are around church people by and large, and they start to lose touch with what's going on in the world and how people operate and think. And so I don't ever want to lose that. And so as I'm talking to a lost person or somebody that's new to the faith, I can relate to them on those means because I kind of know, or at least to some extent, of what's happening, what's going on out in the world.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we've talked about that a lot on the podcast, the need for pastors to be integrated into their communities outside of the Christian context, right? And so for me, for years and years and years, it's been the local cigar shop because I can meet all kinds of men there. You and I've been there. It's like we can just go there and meet people, and people are friendly. It's just great. Where was I? I was just I had to go to Chicago for a meeting recently, so I stopped. I got there early, and I went to the Rocky Patel Lounge that's near O'Hare, basically. And again, it's like everybody's just super chill and cool. I mean, so whatever it is, right? Whether it's if you're a full-time vocational pastor, then I think it is really important that you find a way to be connected to the world outside of, like, I go grocery shopping. I go to the movies. Like, okay, that's fine. That's your general level of participation in the culture. You need another opportunity for that. So I think that's really good. What do you do? Oh, by the way, to speak to Vaughn's like calendaring thing, I was like, hey, I texted Vaughn. I'm like, hey man, you want to come on the podcast? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so he, it like weeks. He's weeks out. That's how he looked at his calendar. He's like, yep, I can do it here.
Yep.
I was like, all right, let's do it. So that's
how we roll.
Responsibility. I love it. What do you do to as a pastor, as an IT guru, exec, whatever you are? Sorry, I don't know the details. What do you
like guru?
Guru. Okay, good. So what do you do to rest? Right, because obviously, you're working, in the world, you're killing it there. You're sacrificing yourself for the church. You have to rest. It's the command of God. It's a gift for us. What do you actually do? How do you find time for it when you're so busy?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I have had to work really hard on. And fortunately, God gave me a wonderful wife that holds me accountable, and she can see things in me before I see it. So I got my head down, grinded. I'm doing what I got to do, and sometimes she comes like, "Hey, I think you need to pause. You need to take a break." And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a look or maybe I'm short or whatever it is, but she can tell like, hey, you need to slow down a little bit. So I'm grateful for that. But just like my calendar, I try to hold Saturday as my day off, my Sabbath, whatever you want to call it, because that's really the only day that I truly have off.
Right.
And so that's not always perfect. Sometimes we need to have some church meetings on a Sunday morning or something, or a Saturday morning.
Right.
And so I accommodate for those things. But by and large, most people know that Saturday is my day off. And man, I'm a homebody. I'm just hanging around the house, being with the family, watching some movies or reading some books or something like that. But also being an introvert, I want to do as little as possible around as few people as possible. And so that's what Saturday is usually dedicated for. But again, sometimes there needs to be some elongated time. And so my wife has helped me to understand that, because I had a habit for a while of taking a week off one job but not the other. And she's like, that doesn't really help you.
No, it doesn't.
So I've gotten better at, taking multiple days off both jobs. So that I can really just sit and think and meditate. So for example, at the end of October, it's been my tradition just to take off and just I go away by myself and I spend time away with the Lord and just prayer, meditation, thinking about the coming year and things of that nature, to read scripture. And that's just, I look forward to that time every year. It's the sweetest time I have with the Lord, and just reading through scripture and praying. And if you don't do something like that, I would highly encourage any of the pastors out there to try it at least once and see how it works.
That's good, man. I think that's really important. And most people learn it the hard way. We wind up really frying ourselves and then hurting other people that we have no intention of hurting. So I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. Well, one other question I wanted to cover with you, and that is, a lot of people are like to talk about, the biggest threat to the church today, and it's like, all right, bro, I know what you mean, but and then usually it's just, but I'm always like. And that's a fine conversation to have. Like, what are the biggest challenges? I think is a better word. You're not going to threaten Jesus, church. He's just going to stomp you out like he's Jesus. Like, what are you talking about? Anyway.
That's right.
That's what he does. He crushes the head of the serpent. We will crush Satan under our feet, Romans. But anyways, but so I think it's fine to talk about, but I'm always more curious, like, what are the actual challenges that you are facing in your particular church? Like, so what is the biggest threat, right? But I don't like that word, to your church, to First Baptist in Bolingbrook. Because when I look at Redeemer, I could say like, well, Redeemer is a healthy church. It's not a perfect church. We've got our problems, but it's a healthy church with great people. It has a great focus. The people really make it. It's such a huge component, right? The congregation itself. But we've been looking at like weaknesses as elders, and then strategizing like, well, how do we effectively, biblically shore up these areas? And so, we've identified some, like for this year, we want to work on better leadership development. We've done really well with that in the past, but lately, last couple of years, and we can blame it on COVID, but I'm not going to do that. It's not that. Like we've gotten weak in that area. So what can we do? So we're looking at leadership development. Another thing we're looking at is, how do we foster a greater sense of shared community in the whole congregation? So there's a sense of real camaraderie that you experience. How do we develop that? Because we have a particular culture and it's a very welcoming church, but it's always going to be this way. People tend to gather in little groups here and there. How do we cultivate a shared sense of oneness experientially? So I know that's very specific. That's to us. That's something that we're looking at. Is there something going on at First Baptist that you can talk about? You say, hey, this is something we really are trying to work on, in this season of our church's life.
Yeah, certainly there's a lot of specifics there. There's always going to be the flavor of the month of what the quote unquote threats are and what that is and what that looks like. But if you look at things like a funnel perspective, and this is probably more general than anything else, the biggest threat is just the lack of biblical literacy and the correct preaching of the word. I had a family come in a couple years ago, and they had moved to the area, been into the area for about a year from another state. And the gentleman told me they had been to 25 churches before they got to ours. And ours was the first one that had dedicated moments of prayer and actually opened up the Bible and kept it open for the entirety of the sermon.
It's crazy.
And I'm like, you got to be joking.
Yeah.
And he said, no, we've been here and there and all these different places. They use the Bible as a jumping off point in order to tell their story about whatever the case may be. None of them went, did an expository lesson or anything like that. And so they really appreciated what we brought out. And so you're probably like me, where we're in a bubble and know a ton of great preachers and churches. And so I, at the time, was naive to think like, well, I mean, it shouldn't be that hard. But remembering back, before when I was trying to find a church, it really is hard. It's tough out there. And so for me, having people to really understand the Bible, I want them to get to know Jesus. I mean, maybe it's cliche or not, but that's my role. That's my job to introduce people to Jesus and help them to get to know him and who God is and what he's done for his people in the past, present, and what he will do in the future. And what that means for us in our lives. How do we live that out? Not just for head knowledge, but so that we can go out and live out the grace of Jesus Christ, and so that we can have an impact on our communities and families and all those different things. So when we lack that, and we have too many cultural Christians that come and take their assigned place in the pew and think that's going to get them to heaven, look, there's a wake-up call. That's not how this works, right? We're not trying to collect tallies in order to get in heaven. So that's really been my goal and focus for our people, to really understand what it means to be a Christ follower, what that looks like, and how we live that out. And going further than that, not keeping it for ourselves. So now how do we go and share it with other people? So that could be what we call evangelism or post-conversion or pre-conversion evangelism versus post-conversion evangelism for discipleship. And so that's really been my main focus. We've got the things we're focused on, youth and leadership and all those things as well. But by and large, right, what is the gospel and how do I live it out?
It's important, right? Because you have to know, because I know like the mission of the church is to make disciples, right? And we're supposed to preach the word and do all that stuff. But you have to know your church to know like how to sort of emphasize the right things, right? Because some churches that are very theologically oriented and they love exegesis and they love doctrine and they're very particular in their understanding of the character of God or whatever. They might be weaker in piety. They might be weaker on the experiential end of things. And so you would like, okay, so we're going to leverage all that good that you're doing. We're going to leverage that, and we're going to focus more on this aspect of experimental Calvinism in our case, experimental theology. Or it might be the opposite, right? They might have such big hearts, man. They are just all in. They have great zeal, but they don't have enough theology. So you're going to sort of, it's like just knowing, like, I'm thinking about all the people that listen to the podcast, right? Because they're all coming from these different kinds of churches. Yes, the mission is rather simple, but it's not easy. And so you just have to know, like, where are we at and what do we really need? What are our weaknesses? But yeah, you got to, like, I like what you said, you got to have a clear understanding of what your mission is. And then you need to know, like, all right, what do we need to shore up and what do we need to take advantage of, because we have, so many maybe giftings in a particular area.
Yeah, like good. I mentioned earlier, like part of the welcoming thing, we weren't quite very welcoming is because I don't even think, I mean, it sounds harsh, but I'm not sure we even loved each other at some point. I mean, there were some adversarial things going on in the church where one person didn't want to speak to another. And so really focusing on just first loving one another. Yeah. And showing the love of God, giving people grace and all those things. You never know what people are going through. So I think as we work through those things and really intentionally focused on discipleship, doing life together and what that looks like, we were at a time where people would only see each other on Sunday morning between 11 and 12. So now, like, hey, now they're going to lunch together and they're bringing groups together and they're having people over to their house. There was a guy who came for a while and he said, you know what, I'm really upset. I like the church, but, the folks are just really odd here. I come and nobody speaks to me. I said, you know what, I understand where you're coming from and absolutely that's something that we're working on. But here's one thing that I noticed. You come into the church and you sit in the same place in the pew. You get here 10 minutes early and you sit there until the service is over and that's it. So I want to challenge you to go out and to meet other people. Why don't you take the first step and go introduce yourself to butt into somebody else's conversation and get to know them? And he really took that to heart. I love it because at this point, I think he's been to lunch with everybody in the congregation and he's gotten to know them. And it's been night and day difference. And so just taking it upon ourselves, we want to talk about, well, they're not doing this for me, but what are you doing for them?
Yeah, I mean, that's good pastoral admonition for a new guy too. Like that's really good. It's hard to do, right? Because you don't want to scare him off. But that's great. It's funny because our church, I ask all of our newcomers when they're joining, what was it like? And I would say 9 out of 10 say like, oh, I was warmly welcomed. Then every once in a while, somebody slips through and it doesn't happen. And I take that, to heart. But there oftentimes is, I don't know what the percentage is. Some people put off an energy and have a puss on, and they like people like, oh, that would normally greet people are a little nervous because you just look like you don't want to be talked to. Right. So I think that was really wise. That's really good. Vaughn, thanks for coming on the podcast and like actually blessing. I mean, we need to hang out. I know you're busy. Yes. You're busier than I am. Yes. We need to, and I'm
get
busy.
On the calendar, brother.
That's
how we need to do.
2 months out on Vaughn's calendar. Do you have lunch or something? So listen, how far away are you from Chicago? Like your church? Is that like a 30-minute ride?
On a good day, it's a 45-minute ride.
On a Sunday, though.
On a Sunday. Yeah, about 45 minutes.
Okay. So listen, if you are in the Chicagoland area and you're looking for a church, First Baptist Church, Bolingbrook, and if you live in the area, like hit it up. But if you're visiting, man, because people always ask, what about Redeemer? I'm like, we're an hour out. Like, don't. I mean, if you're in Chicago, it's unless you're going to hang out here for the day, it's a hike, So. So we're happy, but Vaughn's going to be closer. So
happy to have you.
Thanks for coming on, Vaughn. Appreciate you, man. And
thank you, brother.
We'll definitely get it on the books, man, so we can hang out.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man.
All right. Well, listen, guys, we're grateful that you listen and subscribe to the podcast. So thank you so much. You can find us on the socials at Doc and Devo or Facebook.com/Doctrine and Devotion. And of course, the website, doctrineanddevotion.com. If you would like to support the podcast, beyond that, you can subscribe to our All Access. Doctrine and Devotion All Access gives you theological reflections and devotions 5 days a week, as well as the Banter of Truth podcast that drops on Tuesdays. You can just scroll down on your podcatcher and look down. It says support this podcast. Click that link and you can sign up right there, or you can go to doctrineanddevotion.com/all access and sign up there as well. Thanks for listening, guys. Hope you have a great weekend.